Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. It's Thanksgiving week. Happy Thanksgiving to all our listeners out there. We're thankful for you guys every week, but especially this one. School may stop for the holiday, but the news never does. So let's jump right into it. States and private organizations argued this month that the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals should overturn a district court decision allowing the Biden administration to implement its expanded Title IX rules ahead of oral arguments next month. Joining me with more on this story is Chalkboard News editor Brennan Clary. Brennan, this is a case we've been following all year, really. Could you refresh us on the background?
Yeah, earlier this year, the Department of Education released its proposed rulemaking. Essentially, there was a bureaucratic process in which it revised the rules for Title IX, which is a federal statute, specifically a funding statute that says that education institutions must not discriminate on the basis of sex. I mean, that's fundamentally what it says, and pretty much that's its purview. Which is both very broad, but also quite specific. And then the Department of Education said, we're going to expand that to include different things like students who are pregnant and also staff as well, and gender. So they expanded the rule. And so that was what it did in that bureaucratic process. And then released those in the spring and said, we're going to implement, those have to be implemented by September 1st by every school district, every college and university that accepts federal funds, that we need to, expand this rule, and you need to have the training updated and have the policies updated and basically create like a broader definition of sex discrimination to include gender identity. And so that's what's been caught in the sort of legal controversy here. What a lot of organizations have sued over is specifically some of those provisions expanding the law in terms of gender identity because they say it threatens women's sports. That's one of the arguments. Another one is that it allows students who claim to have a different gender identity to be able to go into the bathrooms, right? These women only spaces. And so that's what some of the opposition organizations are arguing against. And they're saying that you can't withhold federal funds from schools, based on that expansive definition. So that's what's led to a whole bunch of lawsuits. And so now more than half of U.S. states, there's a hold on the implementation of the rule. And then also it's more piecemeal than that, even because some of the organizations like Moms for Liberty and Young Americans for Freedom, they have members in schools, K-12 schools, and also colleges and universities. And those schools are prohibited from implementing the rule as well to protect those members of those organizations while litigation continues.
So then what's the latest on this case?
Yeah, the latest is, it gets pretty technical pretty quick, but it's basically a fight over the court continuing to stop the rule. So what we have is a number of states, specifically Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. And then there's some other private organizations as well. But those are the states that are asking the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals to offer that relief, basically saying that the Biden administration cannot implement the rule. So that's what they're fighting over ahead of the oral arguments next month. So really it's like a fight over what should be allowed and when. And so with these different kinds of, courts, the courts have that authority to say, like, you can't implement this. And the district court in this case actually was one of the only ones to rule against the states and allow the Biden administration to implement the rule. And then they filed an emergency appeal. I think it was and if I remember writing about this, it was like at the 11th hour, and basically said, we need emergency relief. And then the court offered that. So it's one of those kinds of issues of they're basically fighting over whether they should have the right to stop this from being implemented, like in an interim even. And so they're arguing over the merits of the case, but they're also more pressingly arguing for that relief. And in a legal sense too, that relief is that they would not be able to implement it. And it gets very much into, a lot of these, like, what is the harm? So again, it kind of gets into a lot of the different back and forth that we've seen in this case, which I think is super interesting. It gets into the culture war. It kind of gets into like these, the states versus the federal government. There's a lot of different issues I think that you can read between these kids. And then also too, like, you have the federal government saying, like, we have the right, the responsibility to protect all students, including those who are, gender expansive or who have different pronouns. And so we need to make sure that we're preventing them from, discrimination at school, and the rule is the best way to do that. And then you have these states that are pushing back, and these private organizations that are pushing back and saying, like, no, this is too expansive. You can't do that. And then the courts are trying to, figure out, who has the right here. And that's kind of the heart of the case. And again, like, you get into the court documents and you can look at that back and forth of here's what the federal government is saying. And then this is the latest response. So most recently, this was filed on November 12th. And then on November 19th, I believe, is when it kind of became available to the public. From what I follow the cases through different kinds of like free legal systems, they'll notify you. And that's the first time it popped up was about a week later. So I think it was, a little bit of a delay there in its availability. But it's just really interesting, I think, to compare and contrast the back and forth there.
Well, Brennan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.